Good evening, Bob. This is Michael
Good
Ver
evening.
with Late Night in the Midlands. How are you tonight?
Good. I guess we're ready to go.
Yes, we finally are. I am so sorry. For the last 2 nights, we have had a service attack on our IP address, trying to keep us off the air. So we've had to
it's funny because I was scheduled to be on another show tomorrow afternoon, and I got an email tonight saying that their internet's been hacked for 2 days and can't get on either. So it's not just you.
Oh yeah, they're. I mean, it's the freedom of speech Nazis. They're out there.
Yeah, somebody doesn't want anybody to hear what we have to say at this time of the day.
Yeah, it would appear. Now on your end, I hear a little bit. It almost sounds like when a radio's coming in, kind of like the signal's kind of going in. I hear like an interference. I don't know if you.
I hear you perfectly. You don't hear me perfectly?
Well, I hear you just fine. I hear something in the background, almost like a cell phone is next to the phone or something. But it's after what we've gone through tonight, I'm not going to complain. So,
okay.
But
good.
I thought, yeah, good. Hey, I thought we'd start out with a little bit of background, and then get into what led you to write your book. I cannot wait to talk about it. Interesting stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I wrote a book last year called Intrusion: Alien Encounters, and in that one I concentrated on 4 people who had never told their experiences to anybody in their entire life, and they were all in their 50s, and they were ridiculed when they were young, so they just kept it a secret, and finally opened up to me after I met them at a local MUFON meeting. And when that book came out, I ended up doing some guest speaking, and one of the gigs I had was at the Alien Cosmic Expo in Brantford, Ontario. That was held last June, and if we have some time later on the show, I've got some big news for people about what's happening there this year. But anyways, I was actually the opening act, so to speak, at the conference, and as I stood there and looking at the audience, and I knew what they were going to hear that whole weekend, it sort of occurred to me that everybody in this audience, including myself, we were going to go on a really incredible journey over the next 3 days, hearing things that we probably wouldn't believe if we hadn't heard it first, or somebody telling us that had very good credentials, and about crop circles, about aliens, about government conspiracies, about what the presidents knew, and it occurred to me that, well, what if only one of the 24 guest speakers was actually telling something was actually true? Even if only one of the 24, that would still be mind-boggling and would still, be game changers. And then I thought, well, what if half a dozen of them, or what if all 24 people were telling the people in the audience over those 3 days the absolute truth, that what they were saying is actually going on, that visitations are happening, that aliens are real, that the government knows what's going on, that we're part of the hybrid species. It just went on and on and on. And I thought, this would really be a game changer. It would change your life because it certainly wouldn't be the life that we all believe we live in. So I thought, why not do a book and find people who had some incredible stories to tell that, again, if even only one of the 8 stories in my book ring true, it in itself would be amazing and incredible, and the world we live in would not be the world we believe it is. So that's where the idea came from, and I went on an incredible journey just listening to these people tell me their stories.
And you know what? Speaking of stories, I mean, I don't know. Have you had UFO sightings of your own? I have. Well,
my wife and I would sit out in the backyard many times, and we'd see strange things in the sky where they didn't look like stars. They would come and go at right angles, and when they went through the clouds, the whole cloud would open up and it'd be different colors, and we always wondered what that was. But there was one incident that happened to both of us about 10 years ago that even till today I don't know what to say what it is, but I'll give you a little Cole's Notes version on what happened. I was working for the Star at the time and had basically had to get up early and get to work by 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And my wife at the time was working the night shift at a medical facility. And she came home around midnight, and we talked to bed, and then I went to bed, and she was watching TV. And sometime in the middle of the night, and I know it was still dark, she came running into bed and to wake me up, saying that everything's moving around outside. The garbage cans are flying down the street. The backyard furniture is flying everywhere, and you got to come and help me get everything put back together again. So I'm kind of dozy, but I get out of bed, and this is where it gets strange, because I don't remember hardly anything after that, what happened that night, but she does, and she tells me that she told me to look out the front window, and up in the clouds, where the clouds seemed to be parting, and there was like a white light that was punched right through the clouds. I do not remember that at all, but I do remember going out in the backyard while she went out in the front to get the garbage cans, and I went out and collected the furniture. But I remember going outside, and it was completely bright outside, like it was midday, but it really was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, where it should have been pitch black. And everything was swirling around, the furniture, everything, and I finally got it all together and tied it down, and she came in from the front, and I came in from the back, and she says I sat down on the couch and talked to her for a bit, but I do not remember that. I went back to bed, and the next morning I got up, and in my mind I thought, that was some dream I had last night. And I went out, when I talked to my wife the next day, I said, did I go in the backyard last night, and was all this furniture running around? And she says, oh yeah, I got you up, and it actually happened. And when you were out there, she said, I was encased in a blue light. And it was just like a matter of fact to her. It was a blue light, and that's all we talked about. And we didn't even think about this till maybe 10 years later, when we started talking and I started getting into more UFO books, that this incident came up. So I don't know what happened that night. I know it felt like we were in a tornado, but I remember talking to my neighbors the next day, and they didn't know what I was talking about. So as far as I know, there's no missing time, and she says everything was normal except for that incident. So
well,
I do not know what to make of it, but I do know that the blue light means something's come down to visit you. So, and it seems like a lot of people have had abductions. They recognize the blue light all the time. So,
well, I believe it, Bob. I believe it because one incident I had back in the 90s in Rochester, New York, was this huge bright object came up above us. Now, a friend of mine and I both seen it. He drove me home that night. It was a 45-minute drive, and we talked about it the entire way. The next day, I called him and asked him about it. I said, because I wanted to talk about it more. I was excited.
Sure.
And he didn't remember anything I was saying, and I thought either something happened where he, his memory was affected, or he just does not want to talk about it. And to this day, he says,
and that's what happens in a lot of cases. In my other book, almost every one of them had incidents where they saw something that was completely out of the ordinary, yet almost immediately something told them in their mind, there's nothing there, don't worry about it, go back and do what you're doing. And it's almost like something takes over your mind, and sometimes it only takes over one of the person's mind. But I believe you probably saw something, and he probably did too, but somehow his mind was completely erased on that, whatever happened that night.
Oh yeah, and I was completely sober. It was so
yeah.
And we both sat there, stood there in his driveway with the car doors open, looking up at this thing as it went over. And that's all we talked about. And it was at a busy area too of the city. And I didn't hear, nobody else reports it. I'm thinking, again, it's like, something like that. You would think thousands of people had to have seen it, but I didn't see no big stir.
And often that happens when there's only one or two people see something, and especially if you're driving. I've had people tell me they're driving and they look up and they see something, and they're looking at the car next to them, say, pointing, looking up, and they look up and they don't know what they're talking about, and only certain people get to see it. Why that is, I have no idea. But it always bugs me when, you get some people coming on, they say, well, there's no proof that aliens exist. With all these cell cameras, we'd have proof by now. And I tell them, well, there's more than 1 million people that say they've had experiences of some kind, and everybody's not just completely nuts or lying. they're actually the proof is in what they see, and it's quite remarkable how often people don't pull out a cell phone. It's the last thing they think about.
Well, you know, and I can attest to that too, Bob, because when I had my sighting, this last sighting I had, I mean, I could have ran in for a camera in the house. It was close, but I was afraid to go in the house because I didn't want to miss this. I was like, you know,
yeah, exactly. And if you had gone in the house, it probably wouldn't have been there when you got back.
That's what I feared. So, you know, and to be honest with you, I didn't even think of that. I just thought of, wow, here they are. You know, it's whatever it was.
But isn't it strange how you see something and you don't even think about getting the cell phone?
Oh,
and
yeah.
And other people say, well, my God, you must have a cell phone. Why didn't you take a picture of it? And you just don't think about it. There's something in your mind that just says, no, you're too amazed by what you're seeing that the last thing you're thinking about is leaving.
That's the truth, the God's honest truth. It is the last thing that you think of. The first thing I thought of was I got excited and I just was running under it and I wanted to see as much as I could, as long as I could. And that's all I thought about. I didn't care about nothing else.
I've had people tell me that they have gone back and got their cameras and cell phone to go back out onto a veranda or somewhere, and once they get out there, they still don't use it. They just keep staring at the object, and then when it goes away, they're kicking themselves, saying, well, why didn't I put that camera up to my eye to take a picture? It's just something that is blocked out of your mind for some reason. It's like, it's okay to see it, but it's not okay to record it.
And here's another thing, too. I mean, unless you got a really good camera, I mean, if you ever take, the moon could look really big outside, but go ahead and try to take a picture of it with a cheap camera.
It's almost impossible to get a really good picture of anything flying, and unless it lands right in your front lawn and you can go up to it and take a shot of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Other than that, it's going to always look blurry and it's going to always look a little fuzzy.
So,
but there's been some very good fuzzy and strange pictures, more and more every day on the internet that, I know some of them are CGI made and some of them are fake, but I don't believe they're all fake.
Hey, and I just put a video up on my website. I put it up last night actually, and it's down in the bottom on the homepage. If anyone, I don't know, you've probably seen this. I forget what it's called now, but there's a guy he's a really old guy. He was, I don't know, he was on his deathbed pretty much. He knew he wasn't going to be living much longer, so he started releasing everything that he had learned. He had some secret security clearances and things like that. I mean, this guy.
This is the guy that worked at Area 51. I think he's got a funny name. I'm gonna go look, but yeah, it's on the homepage of my website. Now, when I seen it, I thought, just another video, but no, this guy's got me convinced. Yeah, and that's another thing. When they're getting on their deathbed, they got nothing to lose.
Well, exactly. I mean, and then people say, oh, well, he was delirious. No, this guy wasn't delirious. The pictures that he's got, too, I think, they look pretty, okay, what's his name here? It says, former Lockheed Martin employee confirms before dying, aliens are real. And
Is this Bushman?
I don't know. I don't see a name. I don't have the story actually open. I'm just looking at the headline and such.
I'm thinking the name is Bushman. I've seen that quite before, and his story is kind of amazing.
Yeah, it truly is, and there's a lot out there like this, and
there's a lot of people that have amazing stories that the mainstream they just want to ignore because they fall into the same trap that everybody else is. You got to be politically correct. If you say you believe in things, you worry about your job. If you worry what other people think, you're probably thinking the same thing.
If he had pictures of you climbing through somebody's window, you'd be arrested for that, right? But
absolutely,
pictures of extraterrestrial, that's got to be fake,
Yeah, it has to be because there's no proof. That's what everybody says. But even when they're given proof. They still don't believe it.
Yeah, exactly. So now you've talked to a lot of these people who've had experience. I guess you call them experiencers. Yeah,
experience is what they like to be called because you find that not everybody that has an experience with an alien entity gets abducted. A lot of them they're just experiences, they're visitations that they have with them. that happen in their room, in their bedrooms, but they're not actually physically taken anywhere. So the abductees are a different class of experiencers, but they're all fall into the experiencers.
Now, we talk often about the Travis Walton case because I go back to that one often because it's the one that really, it's really hard to deny it. I mean, based on everything that happened, the lie detector test, and Travis feels like that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were going to take off, powering up or whatever, and he got zapped. And so,
yeah, that's what he believes now, and he believes they actually took him aboard and healed him, fixed him up.
Right.
And I think that probably is exactly what happened, if you believe everything he says, because it all sort of falls into place. I mean, the movie they made of him, Fire in the Sky, is mostly fake, and he admits that now, but it was Hollywood trying to convey things that they wanted people to get interested in a movie.
Well, sure, yeah.
It was terrifying, but it wasn't the terrifying way that it was portrayed in the movie. So
right, like I think that at one point they had him in some cocoons or something. He says that never happened.
But he said that he felt like he was smothered, he couldn't breathe, so that was how Hollywood made it look like, that he had this stuff all around him. And
right.
But it was more of I think some kind of a mask or something was put down his throat. Of course, if that happened to you and you saw these aliens with big eyes, you'd be freaked out too. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And, I was telling people back over a year ago, I had to have a stent put in, and this procedure that I went through, I remember I was, drowsy. It was like a dark room. It really, there was a light in my face, and I remember laying there thinking, this is like, I could see somebody going through something like this and thinking that they've been abducted, and it reminded me so much of what people sometimes explain. I'm thinking, I wonder if this is what's going on these spaceships. I mean, when they're putting implants or whatever in you, it did. I mean, that's where my mind went when I was going in. I passed out, and that was it.
Well, I'm sure it is. I mean, you have people who are critics and who are skeptics who say that everything that we hear when people talk about abductions, that it's just their mind reliving something that they've seen on TV, or that they've heard so much about abductions that when they undergo medical procedures at a hospital, they suddenly, in their mind, they're thinking something else has happened. But that may explain some of the stuff, but it doesn't explain, the thousands of people that have had, what they believe is actually medical experiments done on them.
That's right. I mean,
some of the people in my book have had that.
Well, exactly, and it would seem like some of the women that I've spoke to who claim to have been abducted tell me stories about how they were pregnant and then the baby was taken before it was even born and all these other things, and I'm thinking, Are they using women for that purpose?
I think most researchers and ufologists believe that if it's happening, it's happening that way, that they're actually using it for hybrid purposes. But I got to tell you that a big part of my book, the new book, What If, Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind, deals with a woman named Cynthia from the province of Nova Scotia. And I've got, a whole almost 100 pages of the 300-page book just on her alone. And she has a completely different take on everything that we've ever thought about what was going on, and the title of the chapter is Inside the World of the Greys, and she's a law enforcement officer, so you have to think that she's got some, she's not just making this up, but what she tells me and is, if she is right, then everything else we've known about aliens or think we know about aliens is completely wrong. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why is everything else wrong? Why do we believe so much that the Earth has been visited by so many different kinds of aliens, and that there are government cover-ups? And like, who stands to gain if she's right that everything else we've learned from as far as modern day, we can go back to ufology, is completely wrong? Her take on it has a completely different look at what the Greys are, why they're here, and who they are. And it's left me with a lot of questions, because a lot of the things she tells me, I have to stand back and say, well, that can't possibly be true. But again, as my title of the book says, what if what she has been telling me in this book is absolutely true? Then everything else we believe to have been going on isn't. So it's we'll get into some of the things she tells me about the Greys later in the show, I hope, and maybe your listeners can decide whether she's crazy or if she really has this incredible insight.
Well, yeah, and you know what? I've learned in my 8 years of doing this radio show now, I've learned through all the people I've talked to that I don't put anybody in the crazy seat when it comes to this stuff, because I've had my own sightings, and I say anything is possible unless you can prove to me that it's not. And some of these people, I can say this much: they definitely believe what they're telling me.
Oh yeah, that's the one thing I can tell you for 100% certainty, that the 4 people I talked in the last book and the 8 that are in this book, every single one of them has no doubt in their mind. They experienced and they believe what they've experienced, and there isn't anybody that's going to tell them anything different, because some of them have the scars to prove it, and some of them just know that what they've experienced is real to them, as just you and I talking right now.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so, I tend to believe, I think that there's probably a very small percentage who actually make these stories up. I think, maybe 5%. And then there's probably another, 60% who actually believe these things happened to them, and maybe it was something else. I don't know. And then there's those that are real, that really happen.
One of the classic cases that, everybody talks about Roswell, but one of the cases, and a lot of people don't even know about this case, and it's the Rua, Zimbabwe case. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
No, I'm not.
It happened in 1989, I believe. It might be 84, but 89. And it involved a missionary school in Zimbabwe. And these were kids, elementary school kids. They were, I guess, 5 to 12 years old. And there were some Americans and some Canadians at this school, and the parents were missionaries. And one day, when all the kids were out in the playground, they claimed that a UFO came down at the rear of their yard, and 2 to 3 aliens came out, were very tiny, and they were almost dancing and playing along a log, almost like if they were kids. And several of the older kids, the aliens came right up to him and talked telepathically to them, but gave them, each of the kid, a different message. And some of the kids were warned about technology, some of the kids were warned about the climate, some of the kids were warned about government. And these kids, there must have been 60 kids there, and every one of them had the same experience. John Mack actually went there and filmed the kids, and they're on camera. One of the girls is a Canadian who I met twice, and she has no reason to make this up, and John Mack certainly didn't seem to make it up. But and for all her life, she's in her 20s now, but she didn't like cell phones, because one of the aliens told her that beware of technology. It's in the wrong hands, it will destroy mankind. So she hates to be on cell phones. She doesn't like to be near televisions, and it's affected them all their life. So there's actually a film being made about it right now, called the Ariel Project, by I think an American producer named Randlesham. I can't remember what his first name is, but. So, this is a case where I don't know how you can fake this one. You get all these kids who say it happened, and none of the adults saw it because they were inside. This was all at recess. So, and some of them were really terrified when it happened afterwards, and other ones were just sort of, enlightened by it. But a case like that, I don't know how anybody could say it didn't happen.
Well, yeah, exactly, and you know, I really find the ones fascinating when there's actually interaction with other beings. Although, because it's easy for people to say, like, well, even with the Phoenix Lights, people say, "Oh, how do you know those aren't the government's crafts?" And so, you know, well, okay, that some of them might be, but I'll say this: there's people who have given witness testimony that they have interacted with these other beings, and some of them look like insects.
And everybody in my book has had interaction. I mean, I'm not really interested in lights in the sky anymore. I really confine my interest to interviewing people who have actually experienced things, and when I listen to them, I can tell if they're faking it or not. And they all have a completely different story to tell me, and they're all fascinating. And the one common thread is that they believe it happened.
Right. I mean, and some of them, I mean, even have implants in their bodies. I mean, I've had people show me X-rays.
Yeah, well, the one that gives me the inside world of Grace has a very strange implant that in my book there are pictures of what this implant is, and it's like nothing you've ever seen before. And her theories on it just are mind-boggling, and she makes a good case for some of the things she says about it.
Well, Dr. Roger Lear, God rest his soul, but you know, I had talked to him. I had him on the show, and you know, he told me about these implants that when he would go to grab them, they would actually travel. They'd move, and he'd have to stop.
Oh. Yeah. I mean, well, there's something alive in them, or something technology that we certainly don't know here on Earth. So. And if they are government-planted things, and there's certainly a lot of things we have no idea that the governments know.
Well, think about it. We've got nanobot technology now. I mean, they're talking about where they're going to be able to put a nanobot in you, and that nanobot will be able to go into your body and do whatever. Like if there's a germ or something or a bacteria, it'll go in there, it'll attack it. If you got a clogged artery, it'll go in and clean the artery out. I mean, so with that type of technology, you got to think, who are they talking with?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Where did they get this technology from? And I even heard, I think I heard that they have bugs now that actually look like bugs.
They do.
That can fly in the air, that look like flies, but they're actually little microphones with cameras on them. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think Russia had just there was a story come out from Russia. They had a cockroach that looked. You couldn't tell the difference. It looked like a cockroach.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always amazed when you know the government sort of leaks these things out, or people leaks these things out, and then and the spy satellites are able to zone in on so many things and. Even with the terrorist attacks in Paris recently, they'd be able to zone in. They can find the heat in buildings, and they know where people have been. Yet they couldn't find a 6'4" skinny guy with diabetes in Afghanistan after 9/11. I mean, I'm sure we had the technology from the sky to zero in, and I've heard we have technology you can read a dime from outer space. So.
Yeah.
How we couldn't find him, I have no idea.
Well,
the time was right to find him.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I heard that they could read a license plate on the moon if they wanted to.
Yeah. So if they have those technology, I mean, to me it seems like the world is just one big mystery that we really don't know the world we actually live in.
Well, I'll tell you another little bit of technology that has to do with the insects. So if these insect aliens actually exist, they can't be too happy, because they've also now have technology where they can literally control a bug. Like they could take control of that insect. I don't know how they do it. There's something.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Like, and especially with the bumblebees, I think they're trying to do something with them too. So.
Yeah, so just think about it. If you're talking too much and they know you're allergic, well, they might just send a bee your way.
Yeah. I believe Big Brother is. Watching all of us all the time.
Big Brother
probably on your show earlier the last 2 days too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Big Brother's becoming a bully, and Uncle Sam's hanging out on the couch and letting him do it. So
yeah.
So you think that humankind and extraterrestrials. It could be like one consciousness throughout the universe.
Well, yeah. In fact, one of the people in my book who he's actually a director and a producer of films in the United States and in Canada. And he told me of a really strange experience that he had. He spent a lot of time in Tibet when he was younger, and he actually spent about 29 years off and on with one of the enlightened masters over there, one of the gurus, and talking about reincarnation and all this, and the consciousness of the universe. And at one point when he was over there, he asked the guru, he says, I really wanted to, if I ever had an experience with an alien, I'd ask them if they believe in God. And the guru said, well, it's all the same. It's all oneness. We're all from the same thing. And he took that back into his own life and started, meditating a lot. And one day he's meditating, and he's had some out-of-body experiences, but he knew about aliens. But the only aliens he had ever even read about were the Greys, the one that everybody sees with the big heads, the typical Grey that we all see in movies and in books. So he didn't have any knowledge of any other kind of species out there. And during this out-of-body experience, he suddenly found himself in outer space, and he's floating. And as he's floating away from the Earth, he can see the Earth in the distance, and then he knows he's passing Mars, and he's passing Saturn, and he's passing all the planets, and then suddenly he finds himself outside our solar system, and it's nothing but blackness. And he's floating, and he's in his own body. He can see. It's not one of these typical out-of-body experiences where you are eyes, but you're one with everything. He's actually has a physical body when he's there, and that is strange enough. And then all of a sudden he feels as if somebody is staring at him, and he describes it as being, you're at a stoplight, and suddenly the hair on your neck feels that there's somebody in the next car staring over at you, and you look immediately to your left, and sure enough, somebody is staring at you. So it was that kind of feeling he had, and slowly but surely into focus came this giant being that to him looked like an insect. Now, he had never seen a mantis before in his life, didn't even know what a mantis was. But he's staring at this being, and there's a telepathic thought between them. But before he can even think to himself, my God, what is happening? There's this tremendous, overwhelming feeling of love between the two of them. And that's not unusual, because people that I've talked to have had experience with insectoids, particularly the mantis, they always feel this overwhelming feeling of love. It's a strange feeling, because I know if suddenly I'm in a room and a 6-foot insect is standing there talking to me, I'm going to be screaming my head off. But
oh, sir,
people would think that.
I'm going to pass right out, because as it is now,
I probably would too. But he didn't. Before he could even scream or even have a thought of terror, this overwhelming feeling of love came through him, and then there was a sense that they had been together before, and in the conversation they had, the insectoid told him that they have been together before, and this producer asked telepathically, in my body or your body? And the insectoid said, in his body. And that really freaked him out, and the insectoid said, then we'll be together again. And the producer again asked, in my body or your body? And the insect said, in his body. And the producer almost had a sense that this love was so overwhelming, as if they had a relationship at some previous life. And what really wowed him was that he had been a meditator. He taught meditation, and he believed in the concept of reincarnation. But it never occurred to him until that moment that you could reincarnate in a different being. that reincarnation wasn't just something that happened on Earth, that it happened in the universe, and that we all were one with the universe. And it was like an enlightening moment for him, because he fully accepted the fact that he had been on Earth before as a human, as an animal, as even maybe a plant life. But now the concept of being reincarnated as a being in another planet, another part of the solar system, another dimension, was something that actually now was possible too. And that was something he had never thought of before. So this oneness with the universe and the consciousness seems to be something that more and more people are starting to target or hook into, that in their experiences they're getting this feeling that not only do they have some connection with the being, but they have actually lived kind of their lives before somehow. And that itself is mind-boggling. And again, what if it is true? And if it's true that we do reincarnate and we can come back as a gray or an alien or a reptoid, then that means we're all in oneness in the whole universe. And again, that would change the life you're living right now, and it wouldn't be the life you thought you were living.
Yeah, well, that's true. I got to be honest. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't be like it wouldn't matter at all. But for me, I wouldn't be shocked. It wouldn't change my life that much, except for that I'd be able to say, I told you so.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. If in my life, I would think if I knew I could come back as an insectoid, it probably wouldn't change my life either, but it would be something that then it would be in the back of my mind always. I mean, how long have I been alive? How long has my consciousness been alive?
Well, yeah, and that's one of the things we've been trying to solve as a people, is that what happens when we die. So if we find out that we go and live a life on another planet as another being, that kind of go into one of my possibilities of things that could happen. So I wouldn't be too shocked, but it'd be a little more relieving to know that it's not just over when you die.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it would. And the thing is, do our governments, do our religious leaders, do they know this? And is this one of the big secrets that are being kept from us all these times? Because if we knew it, maybe things would change. Maybe we wouldn't fall in line like we are. Maybe, that's the big fear, I think, from the people in control.
Well, one thing's for sure, they're hiding the truth of, they still got people believing that we evolved from a monkey and all these other things, and it's far, far bigger than that, and it's not because I want it to be bigger. I could find out that Mickey Mouse created me, and I'd be okay with that. I just want to know. So, but there's plenty more that's being kept. I mean, some people think that the Bible is all, and it's not. There's a lot more, folks. They're only letting you see what they want you to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, you only have to look at that every religion has their own version of Jesus. Every religion has their own version of the flood. So, they can't have been, 12 different Jesus on the world. There can't have been, 12 different floods. So everybody's talking about the same thing somehow. Somehow it's all connected.
Unless it happened on 12 different planets.
Well, that's another thing. And some of the people in my book, they talk about, the species they all have their own creator too. And they all say the creator of them is the same creator of us. So we're all this one consciousness that we're all connected somehow.
Yeah, and they talk about this Big Bang. I think if there was a Big Bang, it probably happened in a laboratory, and they just look at us. We're about to create. I mean, we're doing the same things. We've got mad scientists who are controlling weather, who are controlling. I mean, you can order your baby now, blue eyes, blonde hair.
I know. I mean, does it really make as religious as you can be the most religious person in the world and believe, everything. But does it really make sense that Noah built a boat and took every animal and put them into the ark? And what we know today, doesn't it sound more like he took the DNA of everything and put them somehow in capsules inside some kind of a ship of some kind?
That makes sense. See, and you and I think we think alike because that's what I've said. I said it was probably Noah's ship and it probably had DNA. I mean, I don't see animals on the other side of the world, swimming across the ocean to get to the ark. But, then people say, well, when God's involved, God got them there, and it's okay. But I wasn't there, and I don't know. So I'm trying to think of it logically, and logically would say DNA.
And Noah was apparently somebody that lived 300 and 400 years. So did we live longer back then? I don't know.
Well, I've also heard about extraterrestrials who live 250 to 300 years, so it kind of makes you wonder.
Oh, yeah. Well, Cynthia in my book says that the Greys, who, by the way, are not called Greys in their world. They're called a species called the Ataraku. They live to be 400 years old in their time, and their time is 2.5 times Earth time. So they live a long life.
Yeah. Well, and they probably aren't eating out of a Walmart like a lot of people are here.
No. But they also don't. I mean, some of the things that I in my book I talk about myths and facts, and if you ask somebody about what is a Grey and what do you know about Greys, I think the average person who knows anything about aliens will say, well, they're these sinister little beings that abduct humans and take them for experimentation. Some people may say they even use us as food sources, that they have government exchanges with, especially the United States. They're allowing people to be abducted and experiment on in return for their advanced technology. But according to Cynthia, none of that's true. They're benevolent beings, and it's all been a big lie by the governments to make people afraid of what is going on.
And here's something I wonder about, Bob, and that is, okay, so because I figured it had to be one or the other or both who wants this secret. So why wouldn't, and I don't know if you have an answer for this or one of the abductees might have talked to you and said, well, this is what they told me, but why wouldn't they just say, you know what, I mean, if I found out there was a group putting out bad information about me, I'd be quick to call into their show or whatever I could and defend myself. So I'm wondering, why not just show up and say, look, we're not here to harm you. And I know now it would be a little difficult, but 50 years ago, maybe not so much.
Yeah. Well, according to her, and actually her name, the name they've given her is Cinta, because in their alphabet there's no Y or H. So Cinta is the one that they've given her in the book. And they did, according to her, the Greys or the Ataraku were the ones that interacted, thousands of years ago with the Egyptians, the Mayans, people back then that didn't have the kind of weapons that we have now. And the problem with today's people is that back then, at one point, human society started thinking that they were better than the aliens, and they started attacking them. So the aliens are basically a benevolent species, so rather than wipe us out, they just left and took a lot of the things with them. And today, anytime they have ever shown up, they get attacked. She tells me about how the Battle of L.A., a lot of people aren't sure whether that was a fake thing or a true thing, and she says that was a true incident. But what it was, they were on a training mission with some of the new pilots to show what would happen if they suddenly showed up in the skies over North America. The first thing that Americans would do would be try to shoot them down. So they say that mankind, humankind, the world isn't ready for them to land here to try to help us get through the next century without blowing ourselves up or killing our planet with the climate change stuff. So, I mean, I don't know if she's right, and I don't know if anything that she's told me is right or not, but she's either got one of the most tremendous imaginations going, or she's actually in telepathic contact with these beings.
Well, if they did show up, Bob, I mean, there's going to be a group like you and I are going to go, wow, that's awesome. Then there's going to be that religious group that say it's the demons. Then you're going to have the other group who says, I told you it's the false flag, the government's doing this. And so, and that would make it dangerous if you're an extraterrestrial trying to make contact.
Yeah, because they are made of flesh and bone, she says. They're not superhumans. They can die, they can be killed. They have ways of fixing themselves, far more technology than we have, but they do die, and you know, some of them did die when they crashed at Roswell, and they were, to this day, apparently, they have never forgiven the United States for never giving back the bodies. They kept them in cold storage, and
I've had guests on, well, at least one guest on, who says that that's all. It was a top secret government experiment, and that he saw the paperwork to it, and that it was just they said aliens to throw people off, and you know, I don't believe that, and there's a part of me that don't want to believe that too. So I don't know. So I could.
But there's so many people that were there that came out afterwards and said it was true. So I mean,
yeah.
I mean, people did see it. I mean, and you know, people in high ranking did see it. And today there's a lot of retired military people, government insiders, that are always coming out with strange things that you'd think can't possibly be true. But again, what if they are?
Exactly. What if they are? Now, you mentioned horrifying medical experiments.
Yeah, well, one of the ladies I talked to, she was just actually a normal person till about, as normal as you can be, till about 7 or 8 years ago. She was having a problem with her husband, or actually I don't even know if it was a husband, but it was the father of her child, anyways, and so at one point, something told her that she had to leave the town she was in and just leave and go to some place that she had never been to before. So she went to a town called Kitchener, which is about 100 miles northwest of Toronto, and started a new life there. And the interesting thing, as a kid, she would see things. And she just thought as a kid that every kid could see things, and she thought they were spirits. And she didn't think much of it, but when she got older, she suddenly found herself being contacted by spirits, and she became a medium. And people were, you know, coming to her for advice and stuff, and loved ones. And that itself seemed to be, you know, the extent of her strangeness. But she also developed an ability to leave her body and go on these out-of-body experiences. And the interesting thing about it was that every single night she had these horrible nightmares, but couldn't remember what had happened after the nightmare. She knew she was somewhere else, couldn't remember anything. The nightmare would end, she'd wake up in a sweat, she'd be in the bedroom, and then all of a sudden, she'd felt like she'd been shot out of a cannon, and the next thing she'd find herself would be on a table in a room of medical experiments. Beings that looked like grays were all around her, and they were shoving things into her, and the pain was excruciating. And at one point, she actually remembers it was as if a hand went right through her stomach somehow, reaching in, and this would happen almost every night to her. It almost drove her insane because she couldn't tell anybody, and she didn't know who to turn to. But there was always these experiments. She felt every single bit of it. They would be sticking things in her privates and down her throat, almost where she couldn't breathe, almost like Travis Walton. She never had the experience that they were actually harvesting anything from her, although it's quite conceivable they were. And she now doesn't have any feeling that there is a child of her anywhere else. But these are just horrible, horrible experiments that happened to her. And over the years, she has still had them, but now she almost is able to block out the pain. They still are happening to her quite frequently, but she's one of these people that if you tell her it's all in her mind, she will get very angry because she's experienced the pain and she experienced the horror, and there's no way anybody's going to tell her that it hasn't happened.
Well, I don't blame her. When you go through something like that, I mean, even the simplest things. I mean, there was a time when we told people that their emails and all that was being, followed and tracked, and then, it's on a smaller basis. They called us crazy. It would make me mad too. I mean, and then later they find out that it's true. Just like later they're going to find out that we're not alone. They're going to wish they had listened, probably. But, Bob, we've got to take a quick break here, so why don't we do that? We'll be just a few minutes, and then then we'll come back and we'll talk some more. We've got some time, so we'll get into this deeper. All right, so Bob, we are back, and let me ask you this: these experiencers, do you find that many of them share similarities in their accounts of what happened? I mean, so is it, I mean, I know there's some different things, like some women are being, maybe harvested, and then there's, but do you find that there's a lot of similarities in some of these stories? And
it's interesting you asked me that, because in my other book, Intrusion, Alien Encounters, there were a lot of similarities. These were people that didn't know each other, yet they had very similar experiences to the I mentioned the Mantid experience, where there was a love, not hate. That there was missing time. There was a feeling that just when they thought they were going to be scared to death, a thought would come into mind, a telepathic thought that would say, "Don't worry, we're not going to harm you. You're going to be okay." And the same thought was always in everybody's mind at some point. They had similar experiences on ships where they were found themselves in green liquid where they could actually breathe. Similar experiences where the beings looked very similar, and the blue light was always a similar thing to them. But in this latest book, I seem to have found 7 people who have absolutely completely different experiences than each other. None of them are anything like the other. So if you read the book, you'll find 8 different experiences. And I can't explain that, because up to this point, even the people I didn't write about in the last book, I would still run into people who told me similar things that had happened to them. But these ones are completely different. So I'm not sure what to make of that.
Yeah. Well, all you could do is really go with what people are telling you. See, I've listened to so many different accounts from people that, and I take those they'll say something and it resonates with me. It's like, hey, I heard such and such said that same thing. So, and there's no
even
connection.
In these books, there are little things like the reincarnation thing that seems to be through almost every one of them. There's some sense that we're all part of this one universe, whether we're human or alien. That comes through a lot of the people. But as I said, the one chapter on Inside World of the Greys, it's a chapter. I do not believe there is any other book or internet article anywhere that has the information that you'll find in this book about the Greys, who they are, where they're from, what the society's like, their life, their food, their planet, why they're here, and how they've interacted with humankind for thousands of years. I mean, I don't think you're ever going to read the story that I've come up with this woman anywhere else but my book. And again, if she's right, it's quite amazing. If she's wrong, then she's had me. But as I say at the end of the book, the only way that I'm going to know for sure whether she is telling the absolute truth is that if some insider, some whistleblower, reads this and contacts me and tells me she's dead on. And if that happens, then that certainly would change everybody's lives, because she has a lot of interesting things to say.
Yeah, yeah. Now, some of these experiencers, they shared connections. It says here when I was reading up on it, and they actually got some of them were got apocalyptic type visions and
Yep.
connections to reincarnation and alien consciousness, and I think that's just fascinating.
Yeah. Well, one of the guys, his name is Wes Roberts, and he actually does a program similar to yours. It's called Contact in Canada on Sunday nights. He's had so many different experiences, and he's most of them have happened while undergoing hypnosis, and so they've been recorded and they've been documented. And the only way to explain who he is that he's an interdimensional being, is the way to put it. And even the hypno-regressionist that has taken him under, she's come to the conclusion that he actually lives more of his life in another dimension than he does here in this human body. When he sleeps at night, he's somewhere else. His consciousness is in another dimension, and he may even have another life in another dimension with a family and everything else. But in a lot of his experiences, and even you asked me about some of the experiences about similarities. Even the woman who had these terrible medical experiences, after a while, she felt that these experiences were necessary and a necessary part of the process that was happening to her, that she needed to undergo to evolve into something else. And Wes Roberts clearly feels that he has evolved into another kind of being, that all humans are evolving into it, but not everybody is willing to admit to it or actually undergo the process willingly. The mind will just say, no, I'm not going to go there. And people that have been abducted are actually part of this ongoing process where they're being changed somehow into a different being. Some of them are light beings, some of them are interdimensional beings, but they're all part of the human evolution.
Well, there's a part of me right now that wonders if there isn't some within the governments around the world, including the United States, who are kind of in on something here, because it seems like our environment is being like transformed, and not so much for us maybe.
Well, there is this conspiracy theory that somehow the world's population needs to be curtailed and needs to be taken from, what are we, 7 billion now, down to about 400 million, and but it needs to be done slowly so that nobody will realize it's happening. And I don't know if I buy into that conspiracy theory, but when you think of all the things that are happening with drought and famine and disease like Ebola suddenly appearing and getting out of hand, and then suddenly not appearing anymore, and people dying of different kinds of flu, you have to wonder if there's something else going on.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know where you sit with this, but I have absolutely no doubts that they're spraying chemicals in our skies for whatever reason.
Yeah. There's a difference between the trails that planes normally make and the chemtrails. Like, there's something happening,
right?
And the GMO thing. Are they doing something in the GMO to kill us over the long haul,
or to at least change our DNA in some way?
Yeah, somehow. And are they preparing us for something? Maybe it's not all bad. Maybe we have to be prepared somehow because something's going to happen to our world, our climate, our something. Maybe we have to go somewhere eventually.
Yeah, maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah. So what do you think the connection is with mankind? Do you think that, did they like whip us up in their laboratory, do you think? And had it something to do with changing who we are? What do you think their role was with us?
Well, if I put aside what Cinta has told me, because I have to actually compartmentalize my brain in this,
right.
because before I even knew Cinta or even wrote about her, I would have said that, I believe most of the ancient alien theories were that, we are a product of something that happened millions of years ago, that, our DNA was mixed and mankind evolved. But something happened because the talent that we had to build the things that we did back in thousands of years ago suddenly disappeared, and we couldn't do it anymore. And even till today, I mean, I just saw something on TV, I think a few weeks ago, that and I forget where it was, but it was someplace in South America where there's this huge monument that they tried to produce with giant tractor trailers pulling the stuff across the landscape, and they couldn't do it with the modern machinery. So how did civilization that was thousands of years ago able to move these things? So it had to be something else. So I think we had some interaction by an alien species that helped us along the way and made us better, smarter, I think, and then they left for some reason. But of course, Cinta has a different take on it, and according to what she's been told, is that we were genetically modified by the Ataraku, but at the time there was different ape species, and they brought a different ape species down to Earth, and that ape species mated with the species that were on Earth and created more of a human being, and they kept evolving over time to the point where we are now. But
well, yeah, I can see.
I don't know whether. I believe there was some interaction somewhere along the line, whether it was that an ape mated with an ape, or it was just aliens came here and mated with the humans, and a new species happened.
What?
But something happened because our lifespan changed dramatically over a certain period. If the Bible is correct, people lived to be 100, 200, 300 years old, and then suddenly we're living to be 50 years old, 60 years old.
Well, I kind of wonder if maybe the first beings here, maybe there was escapees from Mars. They got here, and they started, they couldn't stand the Neanderthals and all these other, things that were here, and they upgraded them. I don't know.
No, I mean that is a theory that I think holds some water. I mean, because suddenly there was a generation leap in mankind's intelligence, and
and the
I
dinosaurs.
Don't think it was just evolution. We just became smarter somehow.
Yeah, and I'm so tired of hearing, well, there's a missing link, and hey, that's junk DNA, and that's a cover up, because you're not gonna. By now in 2015, you're telling me there's still a missing link.
Yeah. The missing link is our alien connection. I think that's the missing link.
I agree with you, and I think that junk DNA would say it all too. And I think
one of the things that Cinta has told me, and again, here's something that I find hard to get my head around, is that because so many people have claimed to have seen mantis, they claim to have seen reptoids, tall grays, short grays, and all kinds of other kind of creatures. Cinta has told me that the only species that has ever visited Earth are the Ataraku, that everything else is completely made up by people trying to make a buck in books, made up by people that want to tell people stories, made up by the government to strike fear into people, that the Ataraku are the only race, that there are other races in the universe, but none of them have the advanced technology that they do to be able to come to Earth. And in fact, most of the races in the universe have no idea Earth even exists. So, but I don't know, because I've talked to at least 5 people who will swear up and down on their mother's life that they have had experience with insectoids. So that her being tells her there's no such thing. So. And I've had one person in my book has a connection with a race called the salamander. And in fact, when I was talking with him, he kept being interrupted by the salamander to try to correct some of the things he was saying to me in this telepathic connection he had with him, to the point where I started asking questions of the salamander, and we had a three-way conversation. So whether or not I was just talking to the alter ego of the person I was interviewing, I don't know. But again, what if I was really talking to somebody in another dimension?
Well, and that's just it. Sometimes I'll get an email from somebody who'll say, "You're not really believing what this person's telling you," da da da. And that's my reply is, how do you know? Okay, it may sound crazy. It may even your logic might tell you, hell no, it can't be. But then, how do you know? What if?
Yeah, I mean, the internet probably would sound crazy to somebody 40 years ago.
It sounded crazy to me when it first come out. I remember I was listening to Art Bell, and all of a sudden on the show you start hearing .com this and that, and I'm like, what is .com? What is all this? And here I am.
I mean, cell phones. I remember watching a television show, and it wasn't that long ago. I would say probably less than 10 years ago, and I think the name of the show was Journeyman, and it was about a reporter that could go back and forth, leaping in time to the future and back again. And in one of the episodes, he jumped to the future in the newspaper. It was the San Francisco Chronicle, I think it was. And in the future, there were no newspapers. There were just these tablets that you could, the news could come alive on your tablet. And isn't that what we have today? The iPad has live news. And this was only, I'm sure it was like 7-8 years ago where this show was on TV. It only lasted a year.
Yeah.
Because it would have been pretty stupid if it kept going on, because science fiction of yesterday is now what's happening right today. So
yeah.
If you told somebody in 1920 that you were going to have a little gadget that you could talk to people anywhere around the world and you carry in your pocket, the guy thinking you're nuts.
Well, right. When I was growing up, I remember, we used to have these conversations on our way to school, and it was, in the year 2000, there's going to be flying cars and this and that and all these other things. And, and now here we are. I talked to a guy who handled the Billy Meyer case, and he told me, I think it was the Billy Meyer case, where one of the prophecies, I guess you could say, he says that there would be a major earthquake, and at this time the cars didn't have rear view mirrors, and I'm thinking, we're seeing now where you're able to look at a video screen, a TV screen on your dashboard, and there's no more looking in the mirror. You look at the screen to back up.
Yeah. And that's happening too. So
yeah.
One of the people in my last book, she had a vision where she saw a whole bunch of people going into what appeared to be a pyramid, although she wasn't sure if it was a pyramid on Earth or a pyramid on some other planet. It actually wasn't a vision. She was actually in a spaceship where she was taken and shown this on a screen, and there was nothing but a line of people as far as the eye could see, slowly walking methodically into this pyramid, and it looked like it was going down somewhere. And the being she was in contact with told her that I got to remember, this happened around 1970, I think, when she had this vision. And she was told that by the year 2015, the Earth would start having a lot of problems. There'd be upheaval in the weather would change, the governments would be changed, the economy would be changing, there would be mass refugees, there would be all kinds of things going on in the world, and it would get worse and worse and worse until some catastrophic event happened, and then around 2050, and then after that everything would be okay. But that's sort of what's happening now, almost. All these things are happening, and this was 30, 40 years ago she had this vision. And what she was seeing in this pyramid, she had the impression that this was happening to another planet somewhere, and that their fate had already been sealed, so they had to leave this planet to go somewhere else, and they were entering a portal in this pyramid. And I had another person that told me almost an identical vision that they had with the same thing. So
Yeah, that's
I don't know.
incredible. And I've also I've heard accounts like this video we were talking about earlier that's on the website of this older gentleman who's now dead. One of the things he said is that there's some like mountain volcano type structures that they use actually as portals to go like into places like Area 51 and stuff like that. That they actually go down into these things, and there's doorways where they just fly to their destination unseen.
There's supposed to be tunnels all underneath the United States somewhere connecting people.
Well, myself and another host, Ryan Gable, we came to this determination that, that would make sense because think about it now. These UFOs, they're anti-gravity, probably have their own magnetic type field around them or whatever, right? So if they're traveling below ground, there's areas where there's, I read a story about these sailing stones, I guess they call them, these rocks that they move across the desert floor. And the best explanation they give is, well, it gets cold at night and ice forms and they slide. And it's like, okay, but that's happening on the moon too. So, and you told me the moon don't have an atmosphere. So, maybe these things are moving below ground and these rocks have metals in them and that's what's pulling them around.
Maybe. The other thing I was told that there are so many different dimensions that we live in the third dimension. But some of the higher forms of life live in the 14th, 15th dimension, and when you get in that kind of dimension, rocks and plants or things that look inanimate on Earth are actually living things. So on Earth, the rocks aren't moving, but if these rocks are on another dimension, they'd actually have almost a life to them.
Oh.
That everything in the world is alive. We just don't see it here on Earth.
Well, I believe that as well because not that I endorse this for anybody, but when I was about 19 years old in that area, 19, 20, I was talked into taking a hallucinogenic. And I know you could say, well, you were just high or whatever, okay? But I'm telling you what, it's thanks to that experience that I had that made me appreciate the nature around me because I don't know if maybe it was just a drug, but I seen the life in these plants. They were doing things. They were, you could see the aura. And now, ever since that experience, I mean, when I go outside at night, I can literally see the aura of plants, not of people, but of plants. I can see it.
Yeah. Well, in my book, I also talk about the drug DMT. A lot of people never even heard of this drug, and I certainly had never heard of it until I started doing some research. But I call it a drug because it can be used as a synthetic. You can smoke it, and it's more powerful than any LSD trip you've ever been on. But the interesting thing about it is it is naturally made in the human brain. And it's a drug that a lot of scientists now are starting to study, and they say that it becomes highly active at certain stress times, particularly birth and death. And there was a doctor, Richard Strassman, who in the I believe it was 1980s now. He, no, I think it was later than that, in fact. But he got a government grant and was paid by the government to do the first full study on the effects of DMT on the human mind when you actually gave them DMT. And it's the same kind of thing that happens with the South American ayahuasca drug where they smoke that. And out of the 60 people that took this drug, more than half of them had alien experiences, where they not only saw aliens, and a lot of them saw mantids, which was kind of interesting on its own, but these aliens almost interacted with them. Some of them expected them. They were waiting for them. And while the high lasted 15 minutes or so, to the person on these high, it felt like hours, days, and in some cases years. And the only thing that the Strassman could figure out after this is that, perhaps all the alien stuff everybody talks about is something that's actually just occurring in your brain, and you're actually having this hallucination, or B, which he thought was more likely, is that this drug somehow opens a part of your brain that allows you to, your consciousness to go to another dimension. And it also allows aliens to actually interact with you.
See, now I would buy that because, you know, in my experience, there was a bunch of bats flying around over this pond, and I didn't see the bats as individual bats. They were all as one. It's like you can see the I mean, it's hard to explain. All I can say is that it opened. It did. It was like another dimension.
That's what he thought. There's something in this DMT that's part of human existence, and if it's there, why is it there? Well, maybe it's the one way that we can connect to another civilization, another dimension, but we don't know how to use it.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, and I would say that, you know, I would never tell people to go out and do these things, but I will say this, you know, I'm glad that I had the experience I did, because it has really opened my mind to a whole another world.
Yeah. Well, this is an illegal drug in most countries, but I think somewhere in Europe right now they're doing a study on it to see if they can actually extend life when the brain is considered brain dead. That apparently, even when it's brain dead, you still have thoughts for a little while, and by giving people this drug, it actually extends your life a little bit. And if they can extend your life a little bit this way, maybe they can extend it before you get to that point.
I see.
It's kind of a strange drug, but it's in all living things, apparently. It's in plants. It's in, humans for sure. It's in animals.
And it's interesting, too, because, you know, all my experience of visiting people in the hospital who are on their deathbeds and things, they seem to have these periods where they are communicating with somebody or something.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And they're totally sane. It's not like in my mom's case, she wasn't all drugged up. I mean, yeah, she was on medication, but I mean, it's like they snap in and out of it. Like it's like their brain, like you said, maybe opens up that portal. I mean, my mother's seen angels. My aunt, she looked at the window and she kept telling somebody, "No, I'm not ready yet. I'm not going." And well, she went. I guess they don't wait for you there.
Yeah. And the other thing is, people say, well, what if they're not angels they're seeing? What if they're actually light beings? But in our mind, we're used to, we think of them as angels, because that's what we've been conditioned to think of. But if you didn't know angels exist, what else would you think they were? Beings of light, probably.
And maybe they do that for our own comfort.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of cases I've heard people say that because our mind is so powerful, and because the alien entities have somehow been able to control our minds, that they can appear in different forms than we actually are seeing them in, because they do it for our benefit. One of the ladies I talked to in my other book is when her first experience happened, she thought she was walking into a restaurant at Christmas time with Christmas lights all over it. And she was a child, and what kid doesn't like Christmas? So it was sort of a way to get her in. If it had just been a spaceship, she wouldn't have gone in, but because it was a restaurant with Christmas lights and jingle bells and all that stuff, it was nice. And when she got inside, she realized it was a round circular room. It wasn't a Christmas at all. But somehow they know what we want to see or what we feel comfortable of.
And and to this day, I think about that now, because when I was a kid, I had two of what I would describe as out-of-body experiences, but they were strange ones because I was in my room and I wasn't able to leave the room. As much as I tried, I couldn't leave the room, and I always thought of them as out-of-body experiences. And then I've had people say, well, I've heard these cases of where the extraterrestrials will take you and they'll put you in a familiar environment so you don't get nervous. Now, I don't think I was abducted, but when you hear stuff like that, it kind of makes you question your own experiences.
Yeah, and that is exactly what I've been hearing too. That one one of the Wes Rawers guy was talking about in one of his experience, he found himself in an apartment, a strange apartment that he shouldn't have been in, didn't know how he got there, and he's walking around this apartment, and there's a being off to just out of his sight. He never gets to see the being, but he knows he's being directed by it, and he's directed to pictures on a table, and he looks into the pictures, doesn't recognize anybody in the pictures, except he has this strong feeling that he's in the picture, although it's not him as he is now. And there's a lot of that happening in this room. He's familiar with this room, and it's a modern day room. Everything is very modern as it is today. The pictures seem out of place, and the other thing that's totally out of place is there's a black phone with a dial on it. And through his regression, he's come to believe that they just didn't get that right. That in his mind, they thought he'd be more comfortable with a round black phone, because that's what we had growing up. But today we don't have them anymore. But so they try to get everything perfect, but somehow there's things that just aren't perfect in the reality you think you're living in.
And well, and another thing, I'm wondering a lot tonight, I know, but another thing that crosses my mind here is I see similarities in ghostly activity and even ET activity. I hear about, while he was floating from the ground, or they came through the walls, and I'm thinking, do they have something to do with that other side? Is that, is that what's going on? Is Aunt Betty over there with ET and, no problem?
Yeah, almost everybody that I've talked to has an experience where they sense that something has come through the walls, that they've actually seen them come through the walls. But again, Cinta tells me that that doesn't happen. That's just something that's made up, and it's a myth that keeps being perpetuated. But again, I've had people tell me it's happened. So, I've never seen it, but she says that doesn't happen. And even with abductions, we've had there's so many stories of abductions, and she tells me that the abduction phenomena isn't real either. And her point is that that there's nothing in the human body that could benefit a race of their intelligence and their advanced technology. They are so far ahead of us now that if they were to try to create a hybrid, it would, pollute the gene pool. There'd be no way it would be an inferior species to one that they already are. So why would they bother doing it? And you have to think about that. It does make sense. Why would they bother taking us? Unless they take us for food, and they're lying to her. Well, and I do. And that thought has crossed my mind, that they absolutely are lying to her to get her to tell me how nice they are, when in fact they're really a bad species out to dominate mankind.
Well, I take what everybody tells me with a grain of salt, because the real truth is your experience, and yes. And so if they are here to eat me, I've said this before, it's kind of, being funny, but I mean it. You think they'd feed us a little better, they'd make sure there wasn't GMOs in the food and all that, so we'd be a little healthier to eat, and all the pharmaceuticals that people take. I don't know how good we would be on the plate, but you never know. So
yeah, but unless all these things are done for a purpose.
That could be too.
I look at all these things, like people ask me, well, do you honestly believe what these people are telling you? And I liken back to my days when I was covering crime, and especially covering murder trials. And I remember the Crown Attorney, our version of district attorneys would tell jurors that, if you probably believe this person killed this person, or likely killed this person, then you have to find them not guilty. You have to be certain they killed it. And I look at all these stories, and I think, well, I think she's telling the truth. I probably believe this, but am I absolutely certain that everybody in my book is telling me the absolute truth, and it's not just something they think they believe, but it didn't really happen to them? I would have to find them all not guilty, because I can't get to that point where I'm absolutely certain that they have. And a DA or a Crown Attorney will tell jurors, use your life experiences when you're deciding whether somebody is telling the truth or not. Well, unless you've had an experience, you can't possibly know what they've gone through. And like, I've never been abducted. I haven't had medical experience, so I'm certainly not in telepathic communication with an alien being. So I can't put myself in their shoes to find out if my experience matches theirs. So all I have is that they're telling me a story that is, in some cases, unbelievable. But what if it isn't?
Well, that's right. And for me, I figure it this way: I don't believe that everybody who says they've been abducted have been abducted, but I do believe that people have been abducted, and I do believe that there are some who do communicate with these beings, whoever or wherever they are, they're communicating with them. And I was reading where some of these folks would hear electronic like type voices, and that their thoughts would be controlled in this and that. And that's kind of, I don't know, that sounds a little scary to me. It's almost like almost like pets. Like, you open the door a couple times a day to see how the hamsters are doing in the cage, and,
Well, pets is interesting because one of the ladies who had an abduction and experience on a ship, she remembers clearly that the alien came over to her just before she blacked out and touched her head, almost stroked her head, and kept telling her, "You're a good girl. You're a good girl." And isn't that what we do with pets?
It is. You're a good boy. That's a good boy.
And I was thinking, people say, and a lot of insiders say, that we have an agreement with the alien species that we get their technology in return for allowing them to take certain people for experiments. And Cinta said to me, and again I had to think about it, and it probably makes a lot of sense, that she said, well, if the Ataraku are that advanced, they wouldn't need to ask permission. They would just come and take you.
Well, yeah.
So why would they even, what would be in it for them?
Look what we do now. We go out into the ocean. We abduct dolphins. We tag them, and then we put them back into the water. And they probably go back and tell stories and say, "I'm telling you, they're real. They're up there." And there's other dolphins that are saying, "No, this is all there is, right here in the ocean."
I wouldn't. Well, they're supposed to be a very intelligent species, so I wouldn't put it past them. But we don't know what's going on, and the problem is we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And we probably don't even know what we do know. So
and
we just think we do.
And that's true. And me, if I really would love to sit down and speak with these beings, even though some people will say, "Oh, they're horrible, they're this or that," whatever they are. At least I die knowing. I look at it that way. But I would like to, but I still don't completely trust them because they've been so secretive, and I know that they're here. I know that they are. I've seen the ships, and I know they're not. Everything I've seen is not man-made. These things are from somewhere, and they're here.
But then you also have the people that talk about the secret space program. Well, there was just a government person that came out recently. Actually, it was another Lockheed guy, I think, who said that we are 50 years ahead of what you think we are. And some people came out and said, no, we're centuries ahead of what you believe you are. So I'm sure that a lot of the things that are in the sky are part of a secret, I won't even say space program, I'll just say a secret military program that's going on. But again, I always wonder if we have so much advanced technology, then why do we allow things like the Gulf War to happen? And surely America, if they had the technology, they could have just gone in and done something very quickly.
And I've asked that same question, and it seems like, I don't know, some say, well, they do use it, you just don't know, or they, they're not supposed to expose what they have, but then there's others who say, well, that's just all distraction for us, what a hell of a distraction it is.
Yeah. I mean, why not use it? If we have this technology, certainly we could end wars very quickly. But there are other, the people who believe in the Illuminati and all that, how it's one world order, and look what happens now. I mean, you got these terrorists going on, and more civil rights are being taken away, and we're kind of saying, okay, yeah, we better have our phones tapped now. We better have the government looking at us at every airport, because you never know what's going to happen. Never know who's going to get in the country. So martial law is getting closer and closer to the point where we may need to have it, especially if something major happens in the United States in the next few months or so.
Well, something major is going to end up happening because our borders have been wide open. I mean, I've said this before. While Granny's being felt up at the airport and they claim it's for security, meanwhile the borders are wide open. There might be, a couple guys out there watching over it, but they're getting orders not to interfere. So, something's coming, and then there's ET, and I'm thinking, boy, what they can do, I know, there's reasons why they wouldn't expose themselves, but they have. People have seen them. We know they're there. And so, how about Fukushima? How about helping us clean that up? How about, helping us get rid of the evil that is ruling this planet right now?
Yeah, unless it's all part of the
plan.
The plan to eventually reduce the population to 400 million.
And that's probably it. I really think that a lot of this is for us. There's a lot of underground, and I mean not just tunnels and bunkers and all this stuff, but I mean I've seen pictures, and I believe this, that there are actual cities below ground. That this stuff, whatever's going on down there, well, that's another ball game. But I've seen pictures of underground farms. I mean, they exist.
Yeah, I mean, look at the Denver airport. People think that there's something underneath there.
Yeah.
And who knows? And remember, I think they've removed it now, but for a long time they had that really strange mural that was up in the airport. People being killed in the apocalypse. Can't speak to
apocalypse. Yeah.
Yeah, it was coming, and why in the world would that be there? It just seems so like a strange mural to have in an airport.
Well, there were several murals actually that were really strange that they had, and then you got the Georgia Guidestones. Okay, so where did they come from? And everyone's going to tell me that those big ass things were put there and nobody knows where they came from. I mean,
and I think they talk about reducing the population to 400 million. I think that's in there too.
They do, and as a matter of fact, I've said this before, that Japan is one of the languages that is not on there. So you got to wonder, is Fukushima a planned event? These things planned by somebody, anyways. I don't know, but
yeah, I know it's really strange, and I've heard that the 400 million will then allow whoever ET is to control Earth more. 7 billion, it's hard to control.
Yeah.
400 million is a lot easier to control.
Well, exactly, and that's another thing too. I mean, why let the whole cat out of the bag until you've got it down enough where you're going to be able to protect yourselves? I mean, because let's face it, if even 300 million people got together in the United States, the government would have no chance. I mean, it would be a mess, and imagine the whole world.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I always thought about myself is that, I think the latest figure is 1.2 million people go missing in the United States every year. And I've always thought, well, where are all these people going? I mean, some of them are certainly killed by serial killers. Some of them are killed by, spouses and hidden, and some just disappear by themselves, and some commit suicide. But where'd the rest go? They can't all be just, hiding somewhere. Because 1.2 million is a lot of people. And one of the things that the salamander either told me or told my other experiencer, and he told me, is that the Greys, they are actually abducting people, and some of them return. Some of them are used for food sources, but some of them are taken to other planets just to work as a slave force.
Well, I could see that.
So,
Who knows? Maybe China's got their own planet out there somewhere. Make someone people are making sweaters somewhere, you know.
who knows? But I mean, because you got to think, like, how do a million and a half people go missing? Like, where do they go? And this happens every year.
And someone in my chat, as a matter of fact, a friend of mine, Ryan, has said the same thing. I've seen the statistics where, I mean, thousands and thousands of people disappear in national parks all the time. And then you hear, well, it might have been eaten by a bear. So, you know, let's call off the search.
They can't all be eaten by bears.
No.
And I don't know how many people go missing in Canada, but I mean, I'm sure it's not the same as the United States, but... I mean, and that's just North America. What about the world? How many people go missing in the entire world every year? And, in third world countries, you wouldn't even notice they were gone, probably. So,
well, exactly. I mean, and think of the pouring that we had from, they said, all these children's come pouring into America for over the border not months ago, right? So, who's going to miss them? Here you go, E.T. Here's those children we promised you, or whatever. I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, it wouldn't put if all this is really happening, then it's happening on such a grand scale that we can't even believe to imagine what's really happening.
Oh, I know it. Now you said that you had some information, I guess, about the Greys. And that type of thing. And so, if you wanted to get into that would be great.
Sure. I've got I got tons. All
right.
I'm not even sure where to begin, but as she said, like all this information comes through telepathic thought and communication and images that are implanted in this woman's mind. Most since January of 2014, and as she said, they are called the Ataraku, but they are what we would call the Greys. And they come from the Orion star cluster, and there are basically they have 3 planets actually in the Orion star cluster. The main planet is called Atara Neri. And according to their language, that means silver-lighted suns, because there are 3 suns that surround the planets. There are 2 smaller planets, and all the planets are basically Earth-like in the sense that there's rivers, there's lakes, streams, a lot of greenery, but they're very environmentally conscious. So there's no pollution whatsoever. And there are 2 other moons that basically are used as hunting grounds for excursions, and because there are giant locust-like insects that are a delicacy for them, and they go on hunting excursions 3 or 4 times a year to these, they call them the insect planets, and they actually have to wear a different kind of breathing apparatus because the air there is not as conducive as on their own planets. But as I said, they're in the Orion star cluster. So it's one of the most visible star clusters from Earth. So people can actually look up in the sky and see it. And they won't tell her where the actual coordinates of the planets are, but just that they are very visible at night, and people from Earth can basically see them. What else can I tell you about their life? They look, well, I said what they look like. They, I don't know if I think on your website you have a picture of one of the aliens on the cover of the book.
Yes.
Okay. That actually is the king Atalantera, and he's a 300-year-old guy. When they get old, they tend to be very wrinkly like that. But most of them have smooth, hairless bodies, and they generally do look a little bit like the kind of Greys that we have seen in internet pictures and magazines and other books. They look a little different in the sense that they're a little more softer looking. They don't have the evil looking features that some artists have given them. Of course, you got to remember that she's getting these as telepathic images, so who knows whether the images she's getting are actually what they really look like or what they want her to draw. But she's drawn a lot of sketches in the book that are not as evil looking as most people would think they are. They don't all have these dark eyes. That is called a night eye. They generally have, eyes like we do with pupils, but they are light sensitive. So the night eye is almost like a built-in eyelid that comes down in certain times, and in certain light conditions. I guess they can see in the dark. So I guess the ones that people see when they believe they're coming into their room is always in the darkness, and so that's why they see these big black eyes rather than actually looking at human-like eyes. They also wear clothes. They don't. They're not all naked or in these little silver uniforms that a lot of people see. But their clothes are very. They're not very colorful. They don't have a very colorful type of culture. It's more beigey and white, and they almost look like. The kind of clothing that you'd find in ancient Egypt, basically. They're not with pants or shirts. It's sort of like one-piece things that go on there, and they do have belts around the center, and
almost like a jumpsuit.
In some ways, it looks like that.
Yeah, almost like a jumpsuit, then.
Not sort of like a jumpsuit, but a very loose-fitting suit, and it's made of very light material because their planet is generally hot. They have a religion. They believe in a higher source. Their god is actually called Inek Hanuk. And if you say it quite quickly, Inek Hanuk, it kind of sounds like Anunnaki.
Yeah.
And she says there was no such thing as the Anunnaki, but in ancient times, that's what the Inek Hanuk was, and it just sort of got translated that way. So perhaps she's correct, and it does make a little sense that over time people would speak different languages, and Inuk might come out as Anunnaki, very similar. So let's see.
I see.
What else can I tell you here?
Well, I'll tell you what. Hang on for a moment. Let's take our last break as far as North Carolina. Last time I looked into it, so I'm sure they're here now. And all the rain was probably to their benefit. But I'm just a conspiracy theorist, right? So let's get back to it with Bob Mitchell. He's telling us about the Greys. And so we're going to give Bob the floor. Bob, I want to give you the floor. Anything else that you could share with us about the Greys would be great. And if anybody's got questions, chat room, or they could call in, and we can handle it that way if they do have questions.
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you for having me again. Last time when Intrusion came out, you were the first late night show that I ever went on for the book, and this new book, What If? Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind, has only been out a couple of weeks, and once again, you're the first show I've been on again, so I really appreciate that.
Thank you, and you're welcome here anytime. I love talking with you.
Anyway, so some of the other things that Cinta has revealed to me is that there are basically three different kinds of spacecraft that the Ataraku fly in. Because it takes about 15 years of our years for them to get from their home world to our world, but they travel at faster than the speed of light, so it's not totally 15 years of Earth time. It's a much shorter distance, but they travel in what they call supply bells, and they are very, very large ships that are basically like flying cities. They are. I'm told they can be as long as 2 miles long and a mile wide, and these are the motherships that some people have said they've seen through the Hubble telescope, and NASA has had some pictures, I believe, that have been on the internet. And so these are these big mammoth ships, and they actually are made up of smaller ships that sort of are interconnected, and these smaller ships break off and become smaller ships, and then the really small ones are the individual craft that most humans see in the skies when they see a UFO. But there's generally, there's apparently about 400 of these supply ships in our, I'm not going to say the atmosphere, but they're out there, far enough from Earth that they can't be seen, and they're always hiding behind planets so that they can only be seen when they have to.
Oh, Bob, and I want to tell you something else they do, because I caught them. I was a couple months back. I was at Lake Murray here in Lexington, South Carolina. There's Lake Murray, and I was there, and it was about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. Maybe a little later, and I had walked off into the park road, and I'm just looking up into the sky, beautiful night sky, and I see these stars, what were stars, start to move. And I said, what the hell? And they're diagonal, just directly across from each other, and it looked, what it looked like, Bob, was it looked like a triangle, and it looked like the top of the triangle, that light was off, but the other two were on. And I caught this thing moving, and it moved a pretty good distance, and I called over my wife, and I said, do you see it? And she didn't see it right away, and finally she zoned in on it, said, yeah, I'll be damned. And I think they sit up there sometimes, and they disguise themselves as star patterns, because most people don't know what they're looking at anyways. And
yeah, well, they do observe. They're always observing the Earth. So they're here to sort of keep an eye on us, I'm told, to make sure that we don't go off and kill ourselves with nuclear capabilities. So they. Whether or not they can stop it, I don't know, but they certainly monitor everything that's going on Earth. And I'm told that their life in society is very much structured like our society is. They have fathers and mothers, although the fathers have a completely different role than we have. Most of the fathers. They're allowed to have more than one wife during their lifetime. So, but they do always have to support the kids anytime they have kids, and the kids get a registration number that is carried with them the rest of their lives. So, anytime the male earns money, but they don't really have money, they get merit points, and they buy things through merit points. A percentage of it always goes to the child for the rest of their life. It doesn't always go to the mother, but it definitely goes to the child. Mm-hmm. And there are grandparents, but they are usually out of the picture by the time the second generation becomes adults, so they don't have much to do with the family after that. But the mother's role basically is to be childbearing, while the male's role is basically to become part of the military, because their society really is a militaristic society. And almost the government is almost like a dictatorship, communism, all rolled into one. Nobody goes without. Everybody has the same equality. Everybody has a house, everybody has a vehicle, and things are bought through the deeds that they earn. When you become a pilot, you get certain merit points, and for every mission you go on, you get more merit points, and the higher grade you are, the more merit points you have, and that's your status. So they've done away with money, but the merit points are really basically like it is. What else? Unlike humans, where we might have many careers during our life, most of their careers, by the time they are 15 years old, which is basically 30 in our years, they stay with the career that they've chosen, and they never leave that career. But it's mostly a militarist type career. If you're an engineer, you're a pilot, you're They have an Air Force called the Ataquaro, and they have a ground force called the, I believe it's pronounced Quavinaria, and it's like our Army, but the most prestigious people belong to the AQ, which is the Air Force. Let's see, what else can I tell you? So everybody has to work. Nobody doesn't work, and the females actually, even though they mostly work in as I won't say wives in the sense that we have wives, but they get merit points for taking care of the family when the male is away on missions. Let's see. They don't have a traditional electricity like we have. Everything is done by light. All the energy is done through a system of light, and every home has what we would call an energy closet, where this light comes from, and they use it for everything from cooking to lighting up to the light and making their vehicles go. They don't have vehicles like cars. All their vehicles are small flying machines. Basically, like we thought we'd have on Earth, where every car would be a flying car. They don't have cars. It's basically personal flying machines that are basically for one person only. So the more merit points you earn, the more flying machines you can have for other members of the family. I know this all sounds kind of strange because we think of aliens having these more.
I expected they transport or something like kind of like your Star Trek kind of transport.
Yeah, no, she tells me they don't have anything like that. That's just movies. Although they do have weapons that are more like, I guess, phasers, but everything works on light. In the ancient times, the pyramids were actually used as grids. They were, as some people thought, they were used as something else than just a place for people to be buried. They were actually used as grids and homing beacons. So that's how they traveled around the Earth, because they travel so fast. It's not like they can look out the window and steer where they're going. And now in modern times, they actually use the nuclear reactors as part of their means of traveling through and over the Earth, which makes kind of sense, because I guess the pyramids used to be sort of a nuclear reactor without the nuclear part. It was just a very light beacon. All of that was taken away when they decided that they couldn't live in harmony with mankind after mankind started becoming more warlike. So they destroyed most of what was in all the pyramids today, and now just basically left empty shells.
Yeah.
What else can I tell you? They do. I'm just sort of skimming the book here. I can get you some more information. Things that she told me, it's almost like it's like a human civilization, but on a slightly different level, because they go through. They do have crime there, but it's not the kind of crime we have here. They apparently they've had like one murder in the past 600 years, and when they are convicted of murder, there really isn't a trial. They have a choice of either being sent to the insect planet where they would be eaten alive, or they get incinerated. And the one person that got charged with murder chose to be incinerated. I guess it was a lot less painful than being eaten alive.
Well, yeah.
Insects.
Yeah, who would choose the inside unless you think you could beat them and get away? And I wouldn't even want to attempt that.
No, I don't think so. They have doctors in hospitals. They don't have any booze, bars, or tobacco.
Good.
They don't. They drink water mainly. They don't have any caffeine type drinks, and they don't have a pharmaceutical drug system, because light and sound is what they use to heal things. They do break legs, they get cuts, they burns, they can suffer deep wounds and broken backs and eye damage. and they can become paralyzed, but they are able to repair the spinal cord. The only thing they can't repair is the brain, apparently. When the brain goes, it goes. But they can, they do heart surgeries. They don't have cancer, and when the terminally sick die because of old age, they have a right to ask that their death not be prolonged. So they basically are allowed to be killed, but humanely.
Well, see, and that's all well and good when you know there's something happening on the other side. But...
Yeah. I mean, reincarnation is a big part of their life. They don't keep pets in their homes. Most of the animals are wild and roam free. They do have a lot of similar animals, and one of the things that they do have is a dolphin-like creature. And a shark-like creature that's very similar to the sharks on Earth and the dolphins. And it wouldn't surprise me if dolphins did come from otherworldly planet than just being born here on Earth, because, as I said, they're the most intelligent beings of the sea.
Yeah.
There has to be a reason for that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if we found dolphins in other worlds here in our own solar system, like where they're finding oceans. I wouldn't doubt it at all if they're not,
Oh, I'm sure they would. It's I think the sky's the limit about what we could find on other planets.
Yeah.
As I said, they don't travel in cars and they don't have highways, but they just have personal craft and bigger commercial air flights where they go to travel longer distances. So they don't have any traffic congestions per se. And there's no public transit. Everything is done on a personalized basis. Isn't
that something? They live hundreds of years. They have no traffic jams. We live a very short time, and we're always stuck in traffic.
I know. I mean, they live a very simple life, I believe. They don't have any professional sports. I asked her to ask him about that. They do have games, and a lot of it involves playing with balls or things that look like balls, but there's no professional games. They have a lot of festivals and celebrations in public parks, and they generally, they don't have any. I mean, it's all basically one race, unlike it is on Earth here, where we have different races. There are different looking Ataraku. Like some are taller, some are smaller, some have 3 fingers, some have 4, some have 4 toes, some have 5. And I'm told that it depends on what part of the country you're from that you have these different appendages. I don't know why, but apparently that's something they do. They sleep for about 5 hours of their time, which is about 11 hours our time.
I may be an alien.
Actually, 5 seasons, one of which is just a harvesting season. The rest are similar to what we have.
Mm-hmm. I would say I may actually be an alien, because I never agree with the 8-hour sleep thing. I always thought 10 or 11 was much better.
Yeah, they generally eat 4 times a day and have small sit-down meals, and generally a lot of fruit and vegetables. They do have poultry and meat, and some of their. They do have a thing that looks like a cow, I'm told, but not quite a cow.
It was probably cloned in China.
They don't bury their dead. Like I said, everybody is incinerated within a few hours of their dead. Because I guess they know they're going to come back in life. The power is all light provided and battery provided. They don't have TVs or cable like we do. They have a satellite communication system that is similar to our computers and handheld computers, but they don't watch things on TV. There's no shows or anything like that. But they do develop personal relationships. They have sex. And there are a lot of bonding between both males and females, but it's more of a closeness than any sexual thing. It's more of a deep emotional bonding with each other. They don't kiss apparently, but they touch the closed lips with their fingers to show affection. What else can I tell you? Some of the interesting things that I found out about it is that there are a lot of, I think I mentioned earlier, myths and things about what we believe has happened in Earth over the times, and some things we think are true and aren't, and some things are. And let me just go to some of those examples. Oh, actually, one of the things I did mention I wanted to do a little more on was we started talking about implants earlier tonight.
Yeah.
In 2008, Cynthia was at home and she felt a prick in her leg, and she had a cat and she thought maybe there was a flea, so she noticed a tiny bump, and it was getting itchy, and she thought it might have been a sliver, so she took a sterilized needle and tried to dig out the sliver, and the more she dug at it, the more it appeared it wasn't a sliver, but there was no pain associated with it, no blood, but suddenly this little tiny white piece of bone, what she thought, popped out of her body. Although it didn't look like a bone after she looked at it, and it wasn't a sliver. She looked at it and couldn't actually make out what it was, but to her it looked like a small tomato seed. And as she was looking at it, it suddenly changed colors, and it went from a white to a brilliant orange, and almost like it was glowing. She thought at first that she might be imagining it, but she put it under a computer and a scanner and blew it up, and it was a blurry image originally, but the more she was able to blow it up, the more she became quite astonished, and I have the actual pictures of this in the book, and what she was actually looking at was actually a little tiny alien head. And the alien head resembled very much like the image of the Ataraku that she would get, 6 years later when she started having telepathic communications. The images in the book are quite striking because you actually can see eyes and nose and features on this little seed. She had another seed in 2012, and when she took that out of her body, it was similar. And when she blew that up, it almost looked like it was kind of little tiny faces, almost like an alien family was on this seed when you blow it up. And there's circuitry throughout the whole thing, too, almost like a mini computer.
Oh, big.
Now, if that's not strange enough, I don't know how many people know about the Crabwood crop circle that happened in 2002 in England. It's quite a famous one where there was a giant alien head that suddenly appeared in England, and right beside it was a circle, looked like a computer binary code. And if you take the seed that was in her leg and superimpose it on this image, it actually fits right over it. This Crabwood alien looks exactly like the alien seed from her leg, which in itself is kind of amazing. The binary code that was in the circle that was below it has been translated by binary code experts, and it has it says basically, beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time to believe. There is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing. A lot of crop circle experts have looked at this message and have come up with a lot of strange interpretations. One of them believes that it's a warning not to trust the Greys, that the Grey image says that, beware of these people. Whatever they tell you, don't believe it. But there are other crop circle experts, such as Patty Greer. I don't know if you've ever had her on your show.
Oh yes, a couple times now. She's great.
Yeah, and I actually asked her for her interpretation for this book, and she came up with a really. I had never heard of this before, but she says the crop circle happened several months after 9/11 happened, and she said it's a warning to not believe everything you have been told about 9/11. And this is a warning that's coming from an alien species. She doesn't say it's the Greys, but she realizes that it looks like a Grey. And she believes this is a warning for us to not believe what the government's telling us. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It could be. When you look at the binary code below it, there's actually two things that kind of look like the World Trade Tower, although cut off in half. So it's strange.
And it is strange. And, the stranger it is, the more true it probably is.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But Cinth has been taught their language, their music, their culture. She has a audio that she gave me. I don't have it with me now, and I don't know how I would get it played on the air for you, but she talks in their language. But I also asked her many questions about things that happened about Roswell. I think we talked about it earlier. She says they were involved in Roswell, but a lot of what you heard about the aliens being kept alive for years is completely false. They died within a couple of weeks, and it's also false that the aliens gave up their technology, because she says one of the things that all Ataraku are taught to go to their grave is that never reveal their technological secrets. Is the one thing that is ingrained in them from very young. And you got to remember that they go into the military when they're about 7 or 6 years old, which would be 12 our age.
Yeah. Well, they say that Hitler, his crew was working on this type of technology. So, I could see him spending a lot of time trying to reverse engineer. But as far as the ETs just giving it to him, I don't know, because look at us. Yeah.
I mean, I asked her about the rumored Nazi connections and all that stuff, and she says there's absolutely no truth to that. What the Foo Fighters were, they were remote-controlled devices that the Nazis had developed, but there was no alien connection to them whatsoever. The Rendlesham Forest is an interesting incident that I've read a lot about. She says that didn't happen. Yeah. But, so many people claim it did, so I don't know what to make of that. As I said, she said the Battle of L.A. did happen. Interesting stuff about the moon.
The moon.
She claims the Ataraku have told her that we never have gone to the moon. It never happened. And basically the reason it never happened is because we didn't have the technology to get through the Van Allen belt, which is 2 rays of highly radioactive particles that surround the Earth, and we didn't have the technology to get through there to survive such a journey.
Well, maybe not.
I don't know. I mean, we've heard all kinds of rumors. Was some of it fake? Was it faked? Was it real? There's so many astronauts that said they've seen things on the moon. So
and what stands with me, Bob, on that whole thing is I had an astronaut on a while back, and he said if that was the case, he says, don't you think the Russians would blow the lid on us that we didn't do it? And unless they're in on it, I mean, I guess they would.
Well, she says the Russians are in on it.
That makes sense.
The Russians actually, there have been unmanned landings on the moon. And things were brought back that had been alien technology from the Russians originally, but the U.S. and Russia was in on the whole thing. So I don't know. The UFOs had been seen in Vietnam, and she says, yeah, they were aircraft, and people weren't hallucinating. They actually did see it because they were monitoring what was going on.
Sure.
She insists they're still the only alien species to ever visit Earth, even though there are so many other claims of other people. Other things. The Ataraku, they've never ever heard of the reptilians.
Never heard of reptilians. No, I know a few people who would. I mean, they would literally put on the boxing gloves with anybody who said the reptilians were not real.
I know that too. So and I've heard different versions that the reptilians are actually not a bad race. They're actually a peaceful race that have been here longer than we have. That they're really not from out there. They're the original people on Earth. So,
yeah.
She insists there is no direct agreement between the governments of the Earth and the Ataraku. They're basically just here, waiting to offer assistance to mankind once mankind decides they don't want to use the technology for military purposes. If they would agree to that, they would hand over all their medical experience that we could cure diseases just like this. But as long as mankind is on a militaristic road, that they won't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well.
So again, these are not my beliefs. These are her beliefs, and based on what she has been told. She says NASA knows all about the ships, and they've known for a long time about them.
Oh, I believe it.
Yeah, and there are a lot of insiders that have left NASA saying that there's all kinds of pictures there that we never get to see. And I believe that. Every once in a while something comes out, but
yeah.
She says the Betty and Barney Hill incident was partly true. She said they did see a craft. The craft did come down, but that they were never taken on board a ship, and it was just something that was planted in their mind by the psychologist that did it. Again, I met Kathy Martin, the Betty and Barney Hill's niece, and Stanton Friedman I know quite well, and their stories just don't jive with what Cinta.
I have talked with Stanton Freeman several times through the years, and I've had people tell me, "Oh, he's disinfo." I don't think so. He doesn't come off that way to me, but
no, I know. Stan is, his main gig basically is Roswell. I mean, that's everything you ask him, he always goes back to Roswell again, but. He certainly, knows a lot about that.
That is his cup of tea. He is the guy.
Yeah. She says the Earth doesn't have a secret space program, even though so many people have said they do.
I see that I have trouble with, only because I think to some extent there's got to be. I just think, even if it's reverse engineering technology that's crashed or what have you, there's some kind of secretive space stuff going on. There at least I think there has to be, but she could be right. What do I know?
Yeah, I agree. But and she has all kinds of things, and I take her to task on a lot of them, but I also give examples where I think she's wrong. She doesn't like it when I say she's wrong. So she says, well, your book's titled What If? And I said, yeah, but at some point you have to think, well, if you're right, then everybody else is wrong. And I can't believe everybody else is lying.
Well, yeah.
My only conclusion is that if she actually is having telepathic communication with this being called Atu Ibu, then he is not telling her the truth, and I've got to figure out why he's not telling her the truth.
Well, see now,
There has
and
to be some reason.
that's like I had a guy who I won't mention his name, but I had a guy who was, and everyone in the chat will know who I'm talking about. But he said he was in contact with an ET race, and they told him some things that were going to happen. Well, these things didn't happen. So I've asked him. I said, "Does that mean they were lying to you?" I've never got an answer really out of them, but.
Yeah.
I mean, it's either you were making it up or they lied to you. I mean, those are the only two options.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to say before we run out of time is that I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going to happen in Brantford, Ontario this summer.
Oh, yeah.
I think the listeners would be very interested in coming up to Canada to see it. It's called the Second Annual Alien Cosmic Expo. And we're going to have some of the top UFO minds in the world is going to be speaking there. Linda Moulton Howe will be there. Richard Dolan's going to be there. Grant Cameron. I believe Paul Hellyer is going to be back again. Not sure about Patty Greer, but there's going to be some other people. And one of the things that is going to take place on the Saturday, and I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with the Washington hearings of, I think, 2013, when they had the UFO experts in front of a fake Congress where they talked about UFOs, and then they asked questions, and I think it went on for almost a week. Well, we're going to do a similar thing up in Canada. We're going to call it, I think, the ET disclosure hearings, where we're going to have some of these people in a panel, and they're going to be grilled by some of Canada's top journalists, and we're also going to invite some people from the States like CNN and Fox and whoever will come, and they'll have free reign to ask any questions they want, and it'll be the Canadian version of the ET disclosure hearings.
Oh, I
and
like that.
It's going to be the last Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of June of this year.
Oh, fantastic. Well, hopefully I could get a lot of these people have been on my show before. Hopefully we can
I'm sure most of them have.
Yeah, we get them all back on again. That would be great. And promote it a little bit. This is what it takes now. As far as Fox and CNN goes, they probably won't make too much news out of that because, and if they do, they'll do it with laughs because they know.
Yeah, that's true, but it can't hurt to invite them.
That's right. Oh, yeah.
I mean, Brantford's about 100 miles west of Toronto. It's a small town. That's where I live in right now, and I'll be speaking at it, and I'll actually be doing a PowerPoint on the inside world of the Greys. But the Saturday morning is going to be this ET disclosure hearing, so we're looking forward. We haven't really announced it yet, haven't even invited anybody yet, but there's a lot of plans in the works, and Linda Moulton Howe is very excited about it. We're trying to get Larry Warren from England, the Rendlesham Forest guy, who has a completely different take on what Jim Pattison and John Burroughs saw. But I think he's coming. And maybe Stephen Bassett, he might be part of the panel too. So we're still putting the invites out. So it should be a really exciting time, 3 days in Canada, and probably one of the most important UFO congresses to take place this year. Or next year, I guess.
And this will be outside of Toronto, you said?
Yeah, it's in a city called Brantford, Ontario.
Oh, now I might have to try to get to that. I tell you, I've not gone to any. The only conference I've ever gone to was a Dr. Caldwell, but other than that, I've never gone to any conferences. It'd be nice to show up at a few of them and meet. Yeah,
this is going to be interesting because, and if the weather is nice, I think they're taking a bus on out to the Six Nations Reservation, which is a few minutes just south of Brantford, where they're going to, they say they can call UFOs down to Earth, and they do it quite often, apparently, the natives on the land there. So that should be an interesting stargazing night if the weather holds.
Yeah, I try to, there's people who claim that they can summon these things, and I go out there and I try to summon them, and they're not listening to me. I've had my sightings, but boy, it's just every night I go out there, and when there's a clear sky, I try. And
you don't have the right connection.
I don't. I know.
They're not on your wavelength yet.
No, or I'm not on theirs.
We're not important enough yet.
No, not yet. But Bob, we are running out of time here, and I do want to thank you so much for being a guest tonight. And I'd love to reschedule you in the very near future and do this again. I love talking with you, and I know we could probably do another 2 hours if we had the time.
Probably. And anybody who wants the book in the States, it's on Amazon.com right now, and I'm sure it'll be on other websites soon too.
All right, fantastic. And we've got you linked up on latenightinthemidlands.com, and we'll keep you linked up there. And I thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. Pleasure again.
All right, have a great one, my friend, and thank you for the work you do.
You too, thanks.
All right,
bye-bye.
Good night. All right, everybody, there he goes, Bob Mitchell.
If you say you believe in things, you worry about your job. If you
Well,
worry what other people think,
if
you're probably thinking the same thing.
If he had pictures of you climbing through somebody's window, you'd be arrested for that, right? But
Absolutely.
Pictures of extraterrestrial, that's got to be fake,
Yeah, it has to be because there's no proof. That's what everybody says. But even when they're given proof, they still don't believe it.
Yeah, exactly. So now you've talked to a lot of these people who've had experience. I guess you call them experiencers.
Yeah, experience is what they like to be called because you find that not everybody that has an experience with an alien entity gets abducted. A lot of them they're just experiences, they're visitations that they have with them that happen in their room, in their bedrooms, but they're not actually physically taken anywhere. So the abductees are a different class of experiencers, but they're all fall into the experiencers.
Now, we talk often about the Travis Walton case because I go back to that one often because it's the one that really, it's really hard to deny it. I mean, based on everything that happened, the lie detector test, and Travis feels like that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were going to take off, powering up or whatever, and he got zapped. And so,
yeah, that's what he believes now, and he believes they actually took him aboard and healed him, fixed him up.
Right.
And I think that probably is exactly what happened. If you believe everything he says, because it all sort of falls into place. I mean, the movie they made of him, Fire in the Sky, is mostly fake, and he admits that now, but it was Hollywood trying to convey things that they wanted people to, get interested in a movie.
Well, sure, yeah.
It was terrifying, but it wasn't the terrifying way that it was portrayed in the movie. So
right, like I think that at one point they had him in some cocoons or something. He says that never happened.
Yeah, but he said that he felt like he was smothered, he couldn't breathe, so that was how Hollywood made it look like. That he had this stuff all around him, and
right.
But it was more of I think some kind of a mask or something was put down his throat. Of course, if that happened to you, and you saw these aliens with big eyes, you'd be freaked out too. So. Oh
yeah, absolutely. And, I was telling people back over a year ago, I had to have a stent put in, and this procedure that I went through, I remember I was, drowsy. It was like a dark room. It really, there was a light in my face, and I remember laying there thinking, this is like, I could see somebody going through something like this and thinking that they've been abducted, and it reminded me so much of what people sometimes explain. I'm thinking, I wonder if this is what's going on these spaceships. I mean, when they're putting implants or whatever in you, it did. I mean, that's where my mind went when I was going in. I passed out, and that was it.
Well, I'm sure it is. I mean, you have people who are critics and who are skeptics who say that everything that we hear when people talk about abductions, that it's just their mind reliving something that they've seen on TV, or that they've heard so much about abductions that when they undergo medical procedures at a hospital, they suddenly, in their mind, they're thinking something else has happened. But, that may explain some of the stuff, but it doesn't explain, the thousands of people that have had, what they believe is actually medical experiments done on them.
That's right. I mean,
some of the people in my book have had that.
Well, exactly, and it would seem like some of the women that I've spoke to who claim to have been abducted tell me stories about how they were pregnant and then the baby was taken before it was even born and all these other things, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
are they using women for that purpose?
Well, I think most researchers and ufologists believe that if it's happening, it's happening that way, that they're actually using it for hybrid purposes. But I got to tell you that a big part of my book, the new book, What If, Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind, deals with a woman named Cynthia from the province of Nova Scotia. And I've got, a whole...
Good evening, Bob. This is Michael
Good
Ver
evening.
with Late Night in the Midlands. How are you tonight?
Good. I guess we're ready to go.
Yes, we finally are. I am so sorry. For the last 2 nights, we have had a service attack on our IP address, trying to keep us off the air. So we've had to.
I it's funny because I'm scheduled to be on another show tomorrow afternoon, and I got an email tonight saying that their internet's been hacked for 2 days and can't get on either. So it's not just you.
Oh yeah, they're. I mean, it's the freedom of speech Nazis. They're out there.
Yeah, somebody doesn't want anybody to hear what we have to say at this time of the day.
Yeah, it would appear. Now on your end, I hear a little bit. It almost sounds like when a radio's coming in, kind of like the signals kind of going in. I hear like an interference. I don't know if you.
Oh, I hear you perfectly. You don't hear me perfectly?
Well, I hear you just fine. I hear something in the background, almost like a cell phone is next to the phone or something. But it's after what we've gone through tonight, I'm not going to complain. So,
okay.
But
good.
I thought, yeah, good. Hey, I thought we'd start out with a little bit of background and
Sure.
then get into what led you to write your book. I cannot wait to talk about it. Interesting stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I wrote a book last year called Intrusion, Alien Encounters, and in that one I concentrated on 4 people who had never told their experiences to anybody in their entire life, and they were all in their 50s, and they were ridiculed so when they were young, so they just kept it a secret, and finally opened up to me after I met them at a local MUFON meeting. And when that book came out, I ended up doing some guest speaking, and one of the gigs I had was at the Alien Cosmic Expo in Brantford, Ontario. That was held last June, and if we have some time later on the show, I've got some big news for people about what's happening there this year. But anyways, I was actually the opening act, so to speak, at the conference, and as I stood there and looking at the audience, and I knew what they were going to hear that whole weekend, it sort of occurred to me that everybody in this audience, including myself, we were going to go on a really incredible journey over the next 3 days, hearing things that we probably wouldn't believe if we hadn't heard it first, or somebody telling us that had very good credentials, and about crop circles, about aliens, about government conspiracies, about what the presidents knew, and it occurred to me that, well, what if only one of the 24 guest speakers was actually telling something was actually true? Even if only one of the 24, that would still be mind-boggling and would still, be game changers. And then I thought, well, what if half a dozen of them, or what if all 24 people were telling the people in the audience over those 3 days the absolute truth, that what they were saying is actually going on, that visitations are happening, that aliens are real, that the government knows what's going on, that we're part of a hybrid species. It just went on and on and on. And I thought, this would really be a game changer. It would change your life because it certainly wouldn't be the life that we all believe we live in. So I thought, why not do a book and find people who had some incredible stories to tell that, again, if even only one of the 8 stories in my book ring true, it in itself would be amazing and incredible, and the world we live in would not be the world we believe it is. So that's where the idea came from, and I went on an incredible journey just listening to these people tell me their stories.
And you know what? Speaking of stories, I mean, I don't know. Have you had UFO sightings of your own? I have.
Well, my wife and I would sit out in the backyard many times, and we'd see strange things in the sky where they didn't look like stars. They would come and go at right angles, and when they went through the clouds, the whole cloud would open up and it'd be different colors, and we always wondered what that was. But there was one incident that happened to both of us about 10 years ago, that almost 100 pages of the 300-page book just on her alone, and she has a completely different take on everything that we've ever thought about what was going on, and the title of the chapter is Inside the World of the Greys, and she's a law enforcement officer, so you have to think that she's got some, she's not just making this up. But what she tells me and is, if she is right, then everything else we've known about aliens or think we know about aliens is completely wrong. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why is everything else wrong? Why do we believe so much that the Earth has been visited by so many different kinds of aliens, and that there are government cover-ups, and like, who stands to gain if she's right that everything else we've learned from as far as modern day, we can go back to ufology, is completely wrong? Her take on it has a completely different look at what the Greys are, why they're here, and who they are, and it's left me with a lot of questions, because a lot of the things she tells me, I have to stand back and say, well, that can't possibly be true. But again, as my title of the book says, what if what she has been telling me in this book is absolutely true? Then everything else we believe to have been going on isn't. So it's we'll get into some of the things she tells me about the Greys later in the show, I hope, and maybe your listeners can decide whether she's crazy or she really has this incredible insight.
Well, yeah, and you know what? I've learned in my 8 years of doing this radio show now, I've learned through all the people I've talked to that I don't put anybody in the crazy seat when it comes to this stuff, because I've had my own sightings, and I say anything is possible unless you can prove to me that it's not. And some of these people, I can say this much: they definitely believe what they're telling me.
Oh yeah, that's the one thing I can tell you for 100% certainty, that the 4 people I talked in the last book and the 8 that are in this book, every single one of them has no doubt in their mind. They experienced and they believe what they've experienced, and there isn't anybody that's going to tell them anything different, because some of them have the scars to prove it, and some of them just know that what they've experienced is real to them, as just you and I talking right now.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so, I tend to believe, I think that there's probably a very small percentage who actually make these stories up. I think, maybe 5%. And then there's probably another, 60% who actually believe these things happened to them, and maybe it was something else. I don't know. And then there's those that are real, that really happened.
One of the classic cases that, everybody talks about Roswell, but one of the cases, and a lot of people don't even know about this case, and it's the Rua, Zimbabwe case. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
No, I'm not.
It happened in 1989, I believe. It might be 84, but 89. And it involved a missionary school in Zimbabwe. And these were kids, elementary school kids. They were, I guess, 5 to 12 years old. And there were some Americans and some Canadians at this school, and the parents were missionaries. And one day, when all the kids were out in the playground, they claimed that a UFO came down at the rear of their yard, and 2 to 3 aliens came out, were very tiny, and they were almost dancing and playing along a log, almost like if they were kids. And several of the older kids, the aliens came right up to him and talked telepathically to them, but gave them, each of the kid, a different message. And some of the kids were warned about technology, some of the kids were warned about the climate, some of the kids were warned about government. And these kids, there must have been 60 kids there, and every one of them had the same experience. John Mack actually went there and filmed the kids, and they're on camera. One of the girls is a Canadian who I met twice, and even till today, I don't know what to say what it is, but I'll give you a little Cole's Notes version on what happened. I was working for the Star at the time, and basically had to get up early and get to work by 9 o'clock in the morning. And my wife at the time was working the night shift at a medical facility, and she came home around midnight, and we talked to bed, and then I went to bed, and she was watching TV. And sometime in the middle of the night, and I know it was still dark, she came running into bed and to wake me up, saying that everything's moving around outside. The garbage cans are flying down the street. The backyard furniture's flying everywhere, and you got to come and help me get everything put back together again. So I'm kind of dozy, but I get out of bed, and this is where it gets strange, because I don't remember hardly anything after that, what happened that night, but she does, and she tells me that she told me to look out the front window, and up in the clouds, where the clouds seemed to be parting, and there was like a white light that was punched right through the clouds. I do not remember that at all, but I do remember going out in the backyard while she went out in the front to get the garbage cans, and I went out and collected the furniture. But I remember going outside, and it was completely bright outside, like it was midday, but it really was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, where it should have been pitch black. And everything was swirling around, the furniture, everything, and I finally got it all together and tied it down, and she came in from the front, and I came in from the back, and she says I sat down on the couch and talked to her for a bit, but I do not remember that. I went back to bed, and the next morning I got up, and in my mind I thought, that was some dream I had last night. And I went out, when I talked to my wife the next day, I said, did I go in the backyard last night, and was all this furniture running around? And she says, oh yeah, I got you up, and it actually happened. And when you were out there, she said, I was encased in a blue light. And it was just like a matter of fact to her. It was a blue light, and that's all we talked about. And we didn't even think about this till maybe 10 years later, when we started talking and I started getting into more UFO books, that this incident came up. So I don't know what happened that night. I know it felt like we were in a tornado, but I remember talking to my neighbors the next day, and they didn't know what I was talking about. So as far as I know, there's no missing time, and she says everything was normal except for that incident. So I do not know what to make of it, but I do know that the blue light means something's come down to visit you. So, and it seems like a lot of people have had abductions. They recognize the blue light all the time. So,
well, I believe it, Bob. I believe it because one incident I had back in the 90s in Rochester, New York, was this huge bright object came up above us. Now, a friend of mine and I both seen it. He drove me home that night. It was a 45-minute drive, and we talked about it the entire way. The next day, I called him and asked him about it. I said, because I wanted to talk about it more. I was excited.
Sure.
And he didn't remember anything I was saying, and I thought either something happened where his memory was affected, or he just does not want to talk about it. And to this day, he says,
and that's what happens in a lot of cases. In my other book, almost every one of them had incidents where they saw something that was completely out of the ordinary, yet almost immediately something told them in their mind, there's nothing there, don't worry about it, go back and do what you're doing. And it's almost like something takes over your mind, and sometimes it only takes over one of the person's mind. But I believe he probably saw something, and he probably did too, but somehow his mind was completely erased on that, whatever happened that night.
Oh yeah, and I was completely sober. It was so and we both sat there, stood there in his driveway with the car doors open, looking up at this thing as it went over. And that's all we talked about. And it was at a busy area too of the city. And I didn't hear, nobody else reports it. I'm thinking, again, it's like, something like that, you would think thousands of people had to have seen it. but I didn't see no big stir.
And often that happens when there's only one or two people see something, and especially if you're driving. I've had people tell me they're driving and they look up and they see something and they're looking at the car next to them, say, pointing, looking up, and they look up and they don't know what they're talking about, and only certain people get to see it. Why that is, I have no idea. But it always bugs me when, you get some people coming on, they say, well, there's no proof that aliens exist. With all these cell cameras, we'd have proof by now. And I tell them, well, there's more than 1 million people that say they've had experiences of some kind, and everybody's not just completely nuts or lying. They're actually, the proof is in what they see. And it's quite remarkable how often people don't pull out a cell phone. It's the last thing they think about.
Well, and I can attest to that too, Bob, because when I had my sighting, this last sighting I had, I could have ran in for a camera in the house. It was close, but I was afraid to go in the house because I didn't want to miss this. I was like,
Yeah. Exactly. And if you had gone in the house, it probably wouldn't have been there when you got back.
That's what I feared. So, and to be honest with you, I didn't even think of that. I just thought of, wow, here they are. It's whatever it was.
But isn't it strange how you see something and you don't even think about getting the cell phone?
Oh,
and
yeah.
And other people say, well, my God, you must have a cell phone. Why didn't you take a picture of it? And you just don't think about it. There's something in your mind that just says, you're too amazed by what you're seeing that the last thing you're thinking about is leaving.
That's the truth, the God's honest truth. It is the last thing that you think of. The first thing I thought of was I got excited and I just was running under it and I wanted to see as much as I could, as long as I could. And that's all I thought about. I didn't care about nothing else.
I've had people tell me that they have gone back and got their cameras and cell phone to go back out onto the veranda or somewhere, and once they get out there, they still don't use it. They just keep staring at the object, and then when it goes away, they're kicking themselves, saying, well, why didn't I put that camera up to my eye to take a picture? It's just something that is blocked out of your mind for some reason. It's like, it's okay to see it, but it's not okay to record it.
And here's another thing, too. Unless you got a really good camera, if you ever the moon could look really big outside, but go ahead and try to take a picture of it with a cheap camera.
It's almost impossible to get a really good picture of anything flying, and unless it lands right in your front lawn and you can go up to it and take a shot of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Other than that, it's going to always look blurry and it's going to always look a little fuzzy.
So,
but there's been some very good fuzzy and strange pictures, more and more every day on the internet that I know some of them are CGI made and some of them are fake, but I don't believe they're all fake.
Hey, and I just put a video up on my website. I put it up last night actually, and it's down in the bottom on the homepage. If anyone, I don't know, you've probably seen this. I forget what it's called now, but there's a guy he was a really old guy. He was, I don't know, he was on his deathbed pretty much. He knew he wasn't going to be living much longer, so he started releasing everything that he had learned. He had some secret security clearances and things like that. This guy.
Oh, yeah, this is the guy that worked at Area 51. I think he's got a funny name. I'm gonna go look, but yeah, it's on the homepage of my website. Now, when I seen it, I thought, just another video, but no, this guy's got me convinced.
Yeah, and that's another thing. When they're getting on their deathbed, they got nothing to lose.
Well, exactly. I mean, and then people say, oh, well, he was delirious. No, this guy wasn't delirious. The pictures that he's got, too, I think, they look pretty, okay, what's his name here? It says, former Lockheed Martin employee confirms before dying, aliens are real. And
Is this Bushman?
I don't know. I don't see a name. I don't have the story actually open. I'm just looking at the headline and such.
I'm thinking the name is Bushman. I've seen that quite a bit before, and his story is kind of amazing.
Yeah, it truly is, and there's a lot out there like this, and
there's a lot of people that have amazing stories that the mainstream they just want to ignore because they fall into the same trap that everybody else is. You got to be politically correct. If you